breaking barriers, rebuilding a legacy. She's turning boardrooms upside down after being told to wait outside. Dr. Aisha Turner had always been a woman who moved with quiet strength. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, she grew up in a neighborhood where people knew struggle all too well. Her mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and her father, a mechanic, believed in discipline and education. From a young age, Aisha knew that success wouldn't come easy. But what she lacked in privilege, she made up for in grit and determination. She was the kind of girl who read books late into the night, who always had more questions than answers in school, and who never accepted no as the final word. When other kids played outside, she was inside making charts, planning futures, pretending to run companies. She didn't dream of being a singer or an actress. She dreamed of being in charge. Her academic record was flawless. Top of her class in high school, she went on to study business at Howard University, then earned her MBA from Stanford. At every step, people doubted her. Professors told her to be more realistic. Recruiters said she was too intense. But she kept pushing forward. Slowly, she rose through the ranks of several companies, always the only black woman in the room, always outperforming, always carrying the pressure of being the first and the only. Years later, with a reputation as a turnaround expert, Aisha got the call that changed everything. A mid-sized technology firm named Pinnacle Solutions had been struggling for years. The board wanted a fresh face, someone who could clean house and fix the culture. It was a bold move when they selected Aisha, bold not just because she was a woman, it's not just because she was black, but because she didn't come from their usual old boy network. She was different in every way. The company was known for innovation back in the early 2000s, but had become slow, clunky, and riddled with office politics. Leadership was stale, mostly men in their 50s and 60s, people who had been around forever, clinging to outdated systems and protecting their turf. New ideas were crushed before they could grow. Talented young employees left as soon as they arrived. Diversity? Barely. Inclusion? Non-existent. The company felt more like a fortress than a business. When Aisha's appointment as CEO was announced, the reactions were mixed. The board was split. Some believed in her. Others thought she was a risk. Employees were curious, but cautious. And the senior management team? They were furious. They felt insulted that someone from the outside was being brought in, especially someone who didn't look like them, didn't talk like them, didn't play by their unspoken rules. Aisha knew this wouldn't be easy, but she had done her homework. Before her first day, she spent 2 weeks studying every financial report, every staff survey, and every department's performance. She took notes on who was contributing and who was coasting. She mapped out her first 90 days in detail. Meetings to have, what systems to audit, what behaviors to confront. She didn't want to walk in as the angry outsider. She wanted to lead with clarity and power. Her plan was simple. Listen, learn, then act decisively. She would meet with everyone, from janitors to engineers to executives. She wanted to hear their stories, understand their pain, and build trust. But one thing was non-negotiable. Disrespect would not be tolerated. She had been disrespected too. Many times in her life, to let it happen on her watch. On her first day, she wore a sharp navy blue suit and minimal jewelry. Her natural hair was braided back neatly. As she stepped out of her car in the company's parking lot, she paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and looked at the glass building ahead. This was her moment. Years of hard work, sacrifice, and fighting to be seen had led her here. She walked through the front doors with her shoulders high and her eyes focused. The receptionist was a young woman who smiled nervously when she saw Aisha. "Good morning, Dr. Turner," she said, standing quickly. "Please," Aisha smiled. "Call me Aisha." She was guided to the executive floor, where her first leadership meeting was scheduled. She had emailed her agenda days earlier. She planned to present her 90-day vision, talk about cultural reform, and open the floor for honest discussion. This was meant to be a fresh start, but as she arrived outside the large boardroom, something strange happened. The double doors were closed. She could hear voices and laughter inside. Executives had clearly arrived early. She reached for the handle, but it didn't move. The door was locked. Confused, she knocked softly. No response. She knocked again, louder this time. Finally, the door opened slightly, and a tall man in a gray suit peered out. He was one of the senior VPs she remembered. His name from the reports. Mark, head of operations for over 15 years. He looked at her blankly for a moment, then said hi. Can you wait outside for a moment? We're just wrapping something up. Aisha blinked. I'm Aisha Turner, the new CEO. He chuckled like she'd told a joke. Right. Just a few more minutes. We're kind of in the middle of something. Then, before she could respond, he closed the door. She stood there in silence, her heart pounding, but not from nervousness, from rage. It wasn't just the disrespect of being told to wait outside. It was the casual, careless way he'd done it, like she was the help, like she didn't belong. She wanted to scream. She wanted to pound on the door and demand her place. But instead she stood still, took another deep breath. She reminded herself who she was. Not the girl from Atlanta anymore, not the outsider begging for approval. She was the CEO. She was in charge. And if they didn't understand that yet, they would. A junior employee passed by and looked at her curiously, unsure why the CEO was standing alone in the hallway. Aisha smiled politely and stepped aside. Inside the boardroom, the muffled laughter continued. But something had shifted inside her. Fire was lit. That one moment of exclusion clarified everything. This wasn't just about systems or strategies. It was about culture. It was about people who believed they owned the place. People who refused to change. Who didn't want her there. But she was there. She wasn't going anywhere. A minute later, the door opened again, and another executive came out. He looked startled to see her. Oh, Dr. Turner, I didn't realize you were waiting. Please, come in. She walked into the room slowly, eyes scanning the faces of the management team. Most looked uncomfortable now. Some avoided eye contact. A few had smug smiles, as if daring her to make a scene. She didn't. Not yet. She sat down at the head of the table, opened her folder, and calmly said, "Let's begin." But in her mind, another meeting was already happening. One that would come very soon. One where she wouldn't just be sitting at the head of the table. She'd be deciding who got to stay at the table at all. What had started as a humiliating moment in the hallway would soon become the spark that changed the entire company. They thought she was someone they could ignore. They were wrong. Because Aisha Turner wasn't just here to lead. She was here to clean house. And her time had just begun. Aisha sat at the head of the long table, her expression calm, but her mind sharper than ever. All eyes were on her, though most tried not to meet her gaze. The room had gone quiet, the kind of silence that follows after someone realizes they've made a mistake but doesn't have the courage to admit it. Some still didn't understand what they had just done. Others knew, but hoped she wouldn't make a big deal out of it. Aisha wasn't going to shout or argue. She believed in showing power through actions, not noise. She began the meeting with a professional tone. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to begin with the vision I've created for Pinnacle's next 90 days. Her voice was steady. No anger, no sarcasm. Just focus. As she flipped open her notebook, a few of the men shifted in there. Chairs unsure of how to respond. One of them reached for his coffee, trying to look relaxed. Another tapped his pen, pretending to be busy, but no one interrupted her now. She explained her plan, clearly reviewing departments, listening to staff at all levels, and analyzing performance data. She talked about building a culture of respect, accountability, and innovation. She highlighted the need to rebuild trust between leadership and employees. While she spoke, a few executives nodded, though it was clear some weren't really listening. One man even glanced at his phone under the table. Aisha saw everything. Once her presentation was done, she closed her notebook and looked around the room. Questions, she asked. There was a long pause. Then Mark, the same man who had told her to wait outside, leaned back in his chair and said with a smile, "It's a very ambitious plan. But I think we need to be careful not to move too fast. Some of us have been here a long time, and we've seen a lot of CEOs come and go. Things take time. Few others murmured in agreement. It was a subtle challenge. He didn't say she was wrong, but he was questioning her approach, reminding her that they had survived before her and would likely survive after. Aisha nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Mark. That's a fair point. Then, without missing a beat, she added, and yet, with all the time that's passed, the company hasn't grown in 5 years. Profits are down, innovation is flat, employee turnover is high. So perhaps moving slowly is exactly the problem. Mark didn't respond. His smile faded slightly. Another executive, Robert, tried to change the topic. We're all committed to success here. You just need clarity about what success looks like under your leadership. Aisha leaned forward slightly. Success looks like a company where no one is afraid to speak up, where talent is recognized regardless of race or gender, where people don't walk out the door because they feel unseen, where results matter more than personal networks. That's what success looks like to me. The room was silent again. No one had ever spoken like that in this boardroom, and certainly not a woman, definitely not a black woman. After the meeting, Aisha returned to her office and closed the door. She sat for a moment in the silence. The morning had confirmed what she already knew. The management team wasn't just unprepared. For her leadership, they were hoping she'd fail. They wanted her to be overwhelmed, emotional, unsure, but they had misjudged her completely. She picked up her phone and called Human Resources. Can you send me the full performance reviews for the entire executive team from the last 3 years? She asked. The HR director, an older woman named Linda, paused. Of course. Would you like a printed copy or digital? Digital. Also, I want a breakdown of complaints anonymous or formal filed against any senior leaders during that same period. Linda hesitated. That's quite a lot of data, I know. I'll wait, Aisha said firmly. Over the next few days, Aisha held one-on-one meetings with each executive. Some came in pretending to be friendly. Others were defensive from the start. Most were polite but distant. A few tried to play smart, telling her things she already knew, hoping to prove their importance. But Aisha listened carefully to every word, watching body language, reading between the lines. She wasn't just gathering information, she was studying behavior. She also met with people from every department: engineers, marketing assistants, janitors, interns. She walked the halls, ate lunch in the break room, asked real questions, and listened without judgment. Slowly, stories began to emerge. Stories of favoritism, of ignored complaints, of employees who had ideas but were shut down by managers who felt threatened. Stories of women being talked over in meetings, of people of color not being promoted despite excellent performance. The picture became clear. Pinnacle Solutions didn't just have a leadership problem, had a deep systemic problem rooted in ego, power, and exclusion. And it started at the top. A week later, Aisha received the full HR report. It was worse than she expected. At least 3 executives had multiple complaints against them for inappropriate behavior. Several had glowing self-reviews that didn't match department results. One had been caught using company money for personal travel, but was never punished. The culture had been protected by silence, by a handshake system that kept power in the same hands year after year. Aisha spent that night at her apartment going over everything. Her living room became a war room. Charts, notes, and files spread across the table. She barely slept. But by morning, she had made her decision. The following Monday, she called an emergency executive meeting. No one knew why. Whispers began the moment the email went out. At 9 a.m. sharp, they all filed into the boardroom. This time the doors were wide open. This time Aisha was already seated, waiting. She looked at each of them one by one. Eyes were steady. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam the table. She simply spoke. In the past 2 weeks, I've reviewed performance data, staff interviews, and HR records. What I've seen is not just disappointing, it's unacceptable. Leadership is supposed to be a model of excellence. But instead, it's been a model of protectionism, dishonesty, and exclusion. Several executives shifted in their seats. A few looked down. She continued. This company needs to move forward. and it can't do that with leadership that clings to the past. Effective immediately, I'm terminating the following executives. She read out names, one by one.
Die.
Mark was one of them. Gasps echoed around the room. Some looked angry. One tried to argue. You can't just fire us. There's a process. There is a process, Aisha said, her tone like steel. I followed it. You'll be escorted out today. You'll receive formal notices by the end of the day. The room exploded into confusion. But Aisha didn't flinch. Security staff were already nearby, quietly standing at the door. No shouting. No drama. Just quiet exits. When it was over, Aisha stood and looked at the remaining members. For those of you still here, she said, consider this your opportunity. From this day forward, no one gets by on seniority alone. We lead with results, respect, and responsibility. If that doesn't fit your style, I won't stop you from leaving. But if you stay, understand this pinnacle is changing, with or without you. Then she walked out of the room, leaving a stunned silence behind her in less than a minute. She had flipped the company's power structure upside down, not with rage, not with revenge. Facts, control, and the authority she had earned. The woman they told to wait outside had just shown them the door, and the real work was only just beginning. After that dramatic boardroom meeting where Aisha Turner fired 4 of the top executives, word spread through the company like wildfire. No one had expected it, not even the employees who had long dreamed of such a change. Most people had only heard rumors about what happened behind those closed doors. Some thought it was a power move. Others believed she had gone too far. But one thing was clear. The leadership of Pinnacle Solutions would never be the same again. Office felt different that day. It was quiet, tense, almost like the air had changed. People walked around whispering. Faces that had been so familiar for years were suddenly gone. Desks were empty, office doors shut, nameplates removed. Security had handled everything quietly and respectfully, but the shock had hit hard. Aisha didn't hide in her office. She walked the halls that same afternoon, calmly greeting people, answering questions when asked. She knew employees were unsure of what would happen next. Some were scared. Others were hopeful. She had just torn down the most powerful part of the company. Now she needed to rebuild. The next morning, Aisha called a company-wide town hall. For the first time in Pinnacle's history, the CEO stood on the floor of the open workspace and not on the stage of the executive auditorium. She didn't want to be seen as someone above everyone else. She wanted to be eye to eye with the people who did the real work. She stood in front of them, developers, assistants, designers, HR reps, interns, and took a deep breath. I know. Many of you are surprised by what happened yesterday, she began. I know it's hard to understand change when it happens so fast, but I want to talk to you about why this change was necessary and what comes next. She told them what she had learned in her meetings, the complaints, the lack of growth, the culture of silence. She didn't name names or embarrass anyone. She just spoke the truth. Calmly, clearly, honestly. For too long, she said this. Company has rewarded politics instead of performance. It's protected power instead of people. That ends now. From today forward, this company belongs to all of us, and we are going to build something better together. There was silence at first, then a few claps. Then more, and soon the room was filled with applause, the kind that's forced, but the kind that comes from relief, from hope, from the feeling that maybe, just maybe, things could finally change. Aisha didn't wait for weeks or months to start making changes. That same week, she launched 3 new internal programs. The first was called Voices First, an anonymous feedback system where employees could safely report issues, suggest improvements, or share concerns directly with her office. The second was Lunch with Leadership, a rotating weekly meal where a small group of employees from all departments could sit with Aisha and other leaders to talk, ask questions, and share ideas. The third was Project Phoenix, a company-wide innovation challenge where teams could pitch new business ideas, tools, or systems and win funding to bring them to life. These programs sent a clear message. This was no longer a company where only top executives had power. Everyone's voice mattered, but not everyone was happy. Some senior managers who had survived the first cut felt nervous. They started to whisper among themselves, wondering if they were next. A few even tried to slow down the new initiatives by dragging their feet on approvals or avoiding meetings. She had already learned how to spot resistance in quiet forms. One afternoon, she called a private meeting with the remaining senior managers. She didn't raise her voice or accuse anyone. She simply showed them a chart department performance over the last 12 months. Then she showed them a list of missed opportunities, employee exit interviews, and client feedback. The data was clear. Some leaders were still not pulling their weight. "I don't want to work in fear," she told them. "I want to work in truth. If anyone here feels they cannot commit to the new direction of this company, I understand. But I need leaders who are all in, not halfway." There were no arguments. One manager resigned that week. Another asked for a different role with less responsibility. Aisha respected both decisions. She believed that leaving was better than pretending. While the top floors were adjusting, something powerful was happening on the lower levels of the company. Employees who had once stayed silent were now speaking up. Ideas were flowing. Phoenix received over 200 submissions in its first 2 weeks, more than any internal program had ever received. One idea came from a young intern in the marketing department, a tool that could automate customer feedback in real time. No one had listened to her before, but now her project was selected, funded, and given a team to develop it. She couldn't believe it the first time. She felt seen. Another came from a maintenance worker who had designed a system to reduce office waste and improve energy efficiency. His idea was not only accepted, but it became a company-wide green initiative. These were people no one had paid attention to before. Now they were becoming the heart of the company's future. Aisha also started reshaping the leadership team, but instead of hiring the usual suspects from outside, she promoted from within. She chose people who had been overlooked: women, people of color, employees with unconventional backgrounds but clear passion and strong work ethics. She didn't care about fancy titles. She cared about results and values. One of her first promotions was a woman named Tanika, a software engineer who had quietly led some of the most successful product updates. Tanika had been passed over 3 times for leadership roles. Under Aisha, she became the new director of product development. Another promotion went to Jorge, customer service rep, who had built a side project to reduce call wait times. His idea saved the company thousands of dollars a month. He was made head of customer experience. These promotions sent shockwaves through the office. People who had given up on growing in the company suddenly felt inspired again. They stayed late not because they were forced to, but because they believed in something for the first time in years. Of course, not every day was perfect. There were mistakes, delays, moments of tension. Change is never smooth. But Aisha didn't hide those struggles. She was honest about setbacks. She admitted when things didn't work. That honesty only built more trust. Outside the company, media outlets began to take notice. Articles were written about the bold CEO who cleaned house and rebuilt a broken culture. Some praised her courage. Others questioned her methods. A few even called her too aggressive. Aisha didn't respond to every headline. She believed that the real proof would come in the results, and the results started to show. In just 3 months, employee satisfaction scores rose by 40%. Productivity increased. More clients renewed their contracts. New clients signed on. Innovation returned to the company like a wave. Ideas were tested faster, feedback loops improved, and teams began collaborating in ways they never had before. Most importantly, people were happier. You could feel it in the halls, in the meetings, even in the way people said good morning. There was energy again. It was pride. Aisha had done something rare, not just in business, but in life. She had taken a moment of deep disrespect and turned it into a turning point. She had been told to wait outside, and instead of getting angry or giving up, she walked inside, took control, and changed everything. Her leadership was not about revenge. It was about justice, about setting a new tone, about reminding everyone that respect isn't given based on title, age, or background. It's earned through action, vision, and courage. In the months that followed, Aisha continued to listen, to adjust, to grow. She didn't pretend to have all the answers, but she was never afraid to ask the hard questions. And the employees of Pinnacle Solutions, they no longer whispered in fear. Now they spoke in full voices, proud of the company. They were helping to rebuild together. After months of hard work and bold decisions, Aisha Turner had transformed Pinnacle Solutions from a struggling company into a place filled with energy and hope. But she knew that true change wasn't just about numbers or programs. It was about building trust every single day. And trust, she realized, was the foundation that had been broken for years. So she focused on making sure that trust grew stronger and deeper. One of the first things Aisha did was to continue making herself available to everyone in the company. She didn't want to be the CEO who stayed locked away in an office, speaking only at meetings or in emails. She wanted to be someone people could see, talk to, and rely on. She kept the weekly lunch with leadership program going, but she expanded it. Now, it wasn't just about eating together, it was about listening. Every week, a different group of employees from all levels, junior staff, managers, even interns, joined her for conversations that were open and honest. At these lunches, people talked about their work, their struggles, and their dreams. Some shared frustrations they had never said out loud before. Others offered ideas about how to improve the company's culture or products. Aisha didn't just listen. She took notes. She asked questions. She promised to follow up. That simple act of paying attention started to break down walls. People began to feel seen and heard. One afternoon, during a lunch session, a young woman named Maya spoke up. She worked in customer service and had been with the company for just under 2 years. Maya told Aisha that she often felt her team's work was invisible to upper management, and that sometimes customers were frustrated because their concerns took too long to reach the right people. Aisha thanked Maya and promised to look into the communication process between departments. The next week, Aisha held a meeting with the heads of customer service, sales, and product development to discuss Maya's concerns. They mapped out the customer feedback process and identified where delays and misunderstandings were happening. It turned out that messages were getting stuck between teams because of unclear roles and outdated systems. Aisha pushed for the creation of a new cross-departmental task force. It's dedicated to streamlining communication and speeding up customer issue resolution. This was just one example of how Aisha used real feedback to make real changes. Her leadership wasn't about grand speeches or big announcements. It was about listening, acting, and following through. Employees began to trust her because she didn't make empty promises. At the same time, Aisha worked hard to make sure the company's policies supported a positive and inclusive culture. She established a new diversity and inclusion council made up of volunteers from every department. Their job was to review hiring practices, promotion guidelines, and workplace behavior policies. They looked for ways to eliminate bias, create fair opportunities for everyone. One of the council's first recommendations was to introduce unconscious bias training for all employees. This training wasn't about blaming anyone, but about helping people recognize the subtle ways bias can affect decisions and interactions. Aisha attended every training session herself, showing that she was committed to learning and growing. Just like everyone else, the council also worked on creating clear channels for reporting discrimination or harassment. Previously, employees had been afraid to speak up because they worried about retaliation or being ignored. Now, with confidential reporting systems and guarantees of protection, more people felt safe coming forward. Aisha personally reviewed every case that reached her office and ensured timely, fair investigations. One story from this period became a turning point for the company's culture. An employee named Jamal, who worked in the engineering team, reported that a colleague had been making inappropriate comments during team meetings. Before, Jamal might have stayed silent, but now he felt supported and confident. The company launched a quick investigation. and the offending employee was disciplined according to policy. Jamal later told Aisha that he felt proud to work at a company that took complaints seriously. "It's not just words anymore," he said, "it's action." Meanwhile, Aisha continued to focus on employee development. She believed that the best way to keep people engaged was to help them grow their skills and careers. She introduced new training programs and mentorship opportunities. Employees could take courses on leadership, communication, or technical skills, either online or in person. She also encouraged managers to hold regular one-on-one meetings with their team members, discussing goals, challenges, and career aspirations. These conversations helped build stronger relationships and gave employees a clear path to advancement. Many who had felt stuck for years suddenly saw new possibilities. One of the mentoring relationships that blossomed was between Aisha and Tanika, the woman she had promoted to Director of Product Development. Tanika had been excited but nervous about her new role. Aisha met with her regularly, sharing advice about leadership and decision-making. She pushed Tanika to take risks and trust her instincts. Under Tanika's guidance, the product team launched several successful updates. One was a mobile app redesign that received excellent customer feedback. The team's morale soared. Tanika credited Aisha's support and the new culture for her success. But Aisha didn't stop there. She also made sure the company celebrated achievements and recognized people's efforts. She started monthly award ceremonies, highlighting employees who embodied the company's new values: respect, accountability, and innovation. These celebrations weren't just about handing out trophies. They were about telling stories. Each award came with a story of how the employee had made a difference, solved a problem, or helped a teammate. Sharing these stories created a sense of community and inspired others to do their best. As trust grew, collaboration between teams improved. Aisha encouraged departments that rarely worked together to start joint projects. For example, the marketing and engineering teams began co-creating new customer tools, blending creativity and technical expertise. The HR and finance teams teamed up to develop fairer compensation packages. These collaborations broke down old silos. Ideas flowed more freely. Work became more enjoyable. Yet Aisha knew change wasn't always easy. Some longtime employees struggled to adjust to the new culture. They missed the old ways, where hierarchy and seniority mattered most. Aisha didn't ignore them. Instead, she invited them to share their concerns in open forums. In one session, a senior manager named Robert expressed frustration. "Moving too fast," he said. "Not everyone can keep up. We risk losing valuable experience." Aisha listened carefully. Then she replied, "Change can be hard, but staying the same means falling behind. I respect your experience, Robert, and I believe we need your wisdom to help guide this change, not resist it. Let's work together to bring everyone along." Over time, Robert became one of her strongest allies. Aisha also kept an eye on the company's external reputation. She knew that to attract top talent and new clients, Pinnacle Solutions had to be seen as a trustworthy and innovative company. She improved communication with clients regularly, sharing updates and inviting feedback. She encouraged employees to share their work on social media and at conferences. Showing the world how Pinnacle was changing, the company started receiving positive press and awards for diversity and innovation. This boosted morale even further. Behind all this progress, Aisha never lost sight of the fact that real leadership means being vulnerable. She shared her own challenges and mistakes with her team, showing that it's okay to learn and grow. Her honesty inspired others to do the same. There were difficult moments, too. Sometimes projects failed. Sometimes employees left. Aisha met those moments with honesty and resilience. She remembered the day she was told to wait outside when she first arrived at Pinnacle. That memory fueled her determination. She wanted no one in the company to ever feel excluded or powerless again. By the end of the year, Pinnacle Solutions was a very different place. Employees were happier, more productive, and proud of their work. The leadership team was diverse, engaged, and accountable. The company was growing again, attracting new clients and talented people. Aisha Turner had not only saved a struggling company, She had changed its soul, and she knew the journey wasn't over. Real change takes time and constant care. But she was ready for whatever came next, because she had built a company where respect, trust, and courage were the new rules, and that was a legacy worth fighting for. The story of Aisha Turner at Pinnacle Solutions had started with silence, disrespect, and tension. But now, after months of bold steps, honest conversations, and smart decisions, the company was no longer what it used to be. It had changed from the inside out. And yet, Aisha knew the work was not over. True transformation doesn't stop when things start improving. It continues through daily action. It's constant learning and the courage to keep going, even when the spotlight fades by. Now, the company had grown more confident, more united. But the memory of how it all began still stayed with Aisha. She often thought about that. First meeting, the moment she was told to wait outside. It was a moment of disrespect, yes, but also a moment of clarity. It had shown her that the leadership system at Pinnacle needed not just adjusting, it needed rebuilding. And that rebuilding had become her mission. As the company entered its second year under her leadership, the results were clear. Revenues were climbing steadily, new products were being launched faster, and employees were staying longer. More importantly, they were happier. Employee satisfaction scores, which had been at an all-time low before Aisha's arrival, had now reached their highest levels ever. But what meant the most to Aisha wasn't the numbers or the praise. It was the quiet moments when someone stopped her in the hallway just to say, "Thank you." It was the handwritten notes she received from team members who had been promoted for the first time in their careers. It was the relief in the eyes of staff who no longer felt afraid to speak up. That was what leadership was about for her, not control, not fear, but dignity. One morning, during her usual walk through the office, Aisha was stopped by a janitor named Marcus. He had worked at Pinnacle for over 10 years and had always kept to himself. But today, he smiled and said, "Ma'am, I just wanted to say this place feels different now. Better. We all notice it." Aisha smiled warmly. "That means a lot, Marcus. Thank you for saying that." "Just doing my part," he replied. "But it's nice to know our part matters now." That sentence stayed with Aisha all day. It reminded her why she had pushed so hard for change, because every part mattered. Every person mattered. The media continued to follow her story. Articles were written about how she had turned the company around. She was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and leadership forums. People wanted to know her secret. But whenever she was asked, "How did you do it?" her answer was always the same. "I listened. I acted. I respected people." Simple words, but powerful in practice. Most companies failed not because of bad products, but because of bad leadership. Aisha had just chosen to lead differently. She was invited to give a keynote speech at a national business summit. The room was full of CEOs, investors, and executives, many of whom had never experienced what it was like to be overlooked or underestimated. She stood on the stage, her voice calm but strong, and shared her story, not just about the changes at Pinnacle, but about that first moment when she had been asked to wait outside. That moment, she told them, was not just about me. It was about every woman, every person of color, every employee who has ever been made to feel small in a place they helped build. I didn't fight back with anger. I fought back with action. The audience was silent, listening carefully. Aisha continued, "Leadership is not about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most responsible one. It's about creating space for others to grow. If we're not doing that, we're not leading, we're just managing." Titles. When she stepped down from the stage, the applause was loud and lasting. People lined up to speak with her, thank her, ask for advice. But Aisha always brought the focus back to her team at Pinnacle. "I didn't do this alone," she said. "I did it with people who believed in doing better." Back at Pinnacle, new traditions had started to form. Every Friday, teams gathered for short wins of the week meetings, where they shared one thing they were proud of, big or small. It was a way to end the week with positivity and connection. Aisha often joined these gatherings unannounced, listening and clapping along. She also started a new annual tradition called Foundations Day. where the company shut down regular work for a full day to focus on giving back. Teams volunteered in their communities, raised funds for local causes, and shared stories about what mattered to them. It wasn't just about charity. It was about building a culture of kindness and care. Aisha believed that a successful company didn't just serve customers, it served people. That belief became part of Pinnacle's mission statement. The employees believed it too, because they saw it in action. Of course, challenges still came. No business is free of setbacks. One quarter, a major product failed to meet expectations. There were delays in supply chains, a dip in customer satisfaction, and rising costs. But Aisha didn't panic. She called a company-wide meeting and said, "We've hit a bump. Let's fix it, learn from it, and move forward." She reminded everyone that mistakes were not shameful. They were opportunities. Her calm leadership kept the company steady, and within 2 months they had recovered. The failed product was reimagined with help from customer feedback and relaunched with better results. Employees began to take more ownership of their work. Managers gave their teams more freedom. The leadership team, once filled with fear, Inigo was now built on collaboration and humility. Aisha often said, "Titles don't make you a leader, your actions do." Her leadership style had started to influence others outside the company. A few of her former critics, the ones who said she had been too aggressive at the start, now admitted they had been wrong. They saw that her bold decisions were not about revenge, they were about rebuilding. But Aisha never gloated. She stayed humble, focused, and grateful. She often shared credit with her team and reminded everyone that leadership is a service, not a spotlight. As her first full year at Pinnacle came to an end, the board of directors invited her to a special meeting. Many of the board members had changed since she first arrived. Some had resigned. Others had been replaced by more diverse, forward-thinking professionals at the meeting. The board chair stood up and said, "Aisha, when we first brought you in, we didn't fully understand what this company needed, but you did. You saw what was broken, and you fixed it with vision, discipline, and heart. You've done more than just save this company. You've redefined what leadership can look like." They offered her an extended contract and additional resources. To continue growing the company, Aisha thanked them, but she also made a request. "If I stay, I want a commitment not just to me, but to the values we've built: respect, integrity, inclusion. This isn't just my legacy. It's our responsibility." The board agreed. The contract was renewed, and a new set of company values was formally adopted, shaped by the employees themselves. In the final staff meeting of the year, Aisha stood in front of the entire company and shared her thoughts. "When I first walked into this building, I was told to wait outside, and for a moment I did. But not because I accepted it. I waited because I knew that the best way to lead is with patience and power, not with pride. That moment became my fuel. And look at what we've built since then." The room was quiet, many eyes filled with emotion. "I want each of you to remember this," she said. "No matter where you sit in this company, whether you answer phones, write code, clean floors, or lead teams, your work matters. You matter. Never let anyone make you feel small in a place where you give your best." There was a long moment of silence, then a standing ovation. That night, as Aisha left the building, she paused in the hallway where she had once stood alone. On her first day, waiting for someone to open the boardroom door, she looked at the wall where a new mural had been painted, images of employees, quotes about courage and growth, and at the center, the words, "This company belongs to all of us." She smiled, knowing the company was in good hands, not just hers, but the hands of every person who had dared to hope, speak, and change. The journey had not been easy. It had taken bravery, discipline, compassion, and a deep belief in what was possible. But Aisha had proved that leadership is not about control, it's about connection. She had turned a moment of rejection into a movement of respect, and in doing so, she had changed not just a company, but lives.